Sunday morning. Good for a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. We've already been to Europe, so we're already, rocking and rolling. We saw some pastries. We didn't actually eat the pastries, but we saw the pastries. But now we get to talk sports for an hour, and I don't think it gets much better than that, does it?
No, of course not. Not in my world.
Not in your world. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dwight Stone's longtime member of SHM really is no stranger to all of us. But just in case you're not familiar with Dwight, I will let you know who he is. Track and field extraordinaire, Olympic medalist, won 2 bronze medals in, what was it, the 72 and 76 Olympics in, I believe it was Munich and Montreal, correct? You hold numerous world records, is it?
I did. I set 10 world records total.
10 world records that you can. I'm still not sure if you can jump higher than me, but, I'm sure you can, right?
I do no more jumping. I only coach jumping now.
There you go. You only coach. And a star at UCLA on the collegiate ranks. I mean, Dwight, you're an incredible athlete, and we're really excited to hear not only about your journey today, but to talk a little bit about the Olympics and what the future might hold for the Olympic Games. Talk a little Super Bowl, maybe some other sports, and maybe a little faith along the way. What do you say?
I think that's a great idea, but I want to start out by saying thank you so much to you and to Rabbi DiPaolo and Rabbi Steinberg. This has been an amazing week, and we've got a lot of the programs and really enjoyed it. And I just want to say, Linda and I have one question. Can we do this every weekend?
We want to do this every weekend. Well, I'll tell you what, if we can raise the same amount of money every single weekend, we will make sure that it happens. How about that?
Well, to that point, I want to say that if those of you who may be so inclined and so inspired at any time during this presentation, you can click the donate button in the chat and donate generously to SHM for programs just like this one and Rabbi Zive's musical program that we vigorously support. And I really appreciate everyone who donated to this particular program this morning.
Yes, thank you for being such strong supporters. So, Dwight, how did it begin for you? What made you say, other than the length of your legs, what made you say, I want to start jumping over sticks with a very tall stick in my hand?
Now, actually, no stick in my hand. That's the pole vault.
Oh, well, never mind then. See, I don't know anything about that.
You define gravity for a minute, just like the long jump and the triple jump. It actually was very much an accident. I was 9.5 years old, so at that point, I did not know how long my legs might be. I had a good chance of it. My mother, though not that tall, had very long legs, and my father's 6'3", now 6'2", at 88 years of age. God bless him. And I was really looking for a baseball game on TV. I was looking for a Dodger game. And as I flipped around the channels, I happened to accidentally land on Wide World of Sports in July 1963, and they were covering the U.S. versus the Soviet Union dual track meet, which was a very big deal at the time, way before your time, Rabbi. But pretty much it came down to, if they beat the U.S. in a track meet, that means that their ideology and way of life was better. That's how strong the Cold War was in the 60s. And in that particular meet in Moscow with a packed crowd, ABC came back from a commercial. I could see them pushing in to this filled stadium. And I could see that it was a track meet, but I saw no one running around the track. So as they pushed in closer and closer, this one guy was standing there staring at a standard crossbar and a pile of sawdust. And he took a couple of walking steps, a couple of jogging steps, and 4 or 5 quick running steps and jumped over this bar set at 7'5 3/4", which was then his 5th outdoor world record. Crowd went crazy. And that particular day, I was looking for a baseball game. I was also looking to play baseball. And none of my friends were home. I mean, literally none of them. And all I needed was one more person to play catch, 2 more people to play pickle, or 3 more people to play over the line. And I couldn't find anyone. So after watching this guy do this all by himself with no help, I said, that looks pretty swell. And all these people getting pretty excited. So I knew my friend Bobby down the street had a bamboo pole. I don't know why I knew that, but I knew he had one. And because he wasn't answering his phone, I knew he wasn't home. So I leaped over his back wall, grabbed his pole. My dad, it was a contractor, so he had lots of wood and bricks and things laying around. My mom had a licensed childcare business, so she had lots of small mattresses. And I carted all of this equipment out to my front yard, built my own standard, used Bobby's crossbar bamboo, and threw and pulled out some pits, which were mattresses, and I started jumping right there in the front yard, trying to emulate what I had seen. And at that point, I said, well, there isn't any place for me to really do this except for by myself. But I became crazy about trying to find track meets on television. And I just kept at it and kept at it on my own. And once I got to high school, it was organized and I was coached. And I had an incredible amount of success starting at the high school level. And it just was one of those fated things. I was supposed to be in front of that television set on that Sunday afternoon.
That's unbelievable. I mean, fated things. I like that you said that. I mean, that it's really a cool story. And then, did you ever believe that you would be nearly as successful as you were at such a young age?
Well, I really wanted to play baseball. That was my passion. But where I grew up, they had no little league program. And by the time I moved to a place where they did, I was 12 and a half. If you don't have the skills by then, you can forget it. I never played hardball. I'd only played softball. So baseball was not going to be an avenue for me. I always dreamt of and planned to be an athlete at some level, but I thought it would be baseball. But being right-handed, I would have either had to be the greatest right-handed first baseman ever, or a great pitcher, not fast enough to play the outfield. So my options were limited as a baseball player anyway, but I never pursued it after that. But once I got to high school, I had just watched the Olympic Games in 1968. They were that fall, and I was in a three-year high school. So I was a sophomore. I was just 14, and I saw Dick Fosbury win the gold medal. And I had known about this backwards way of jumping because I'd seen some still pictures, never seen anything live or video, but I'd seen stills. And I said, yeah, he jumps like Bobby Lawrence at Wilson Junior High School, but you don't jump like that into sawdust, which is what we had. So I kept fooling around with the jumping style of my Russian idol for the pretty much the first part of my sophomore year, and I started fooling around with the backwards style, and it just seemed to work really well for me. I'm built a lot like Dick. He's about an inch shorter than me and about 5 pounds heavier, and I could see at that point it was growing very quickly, and it seemed like it might be something viable. So one day in practice, I matched my personal best in practice right before a very big meet. And though my coach was not big on the technique because he felt that his kids would get injured doing it, I convinced him to let me try it. And I won that particular track meet. We won as a team because of the high jump result. And then I improved 3 inches in 2 days later at a bigger meet. And from then on, from late April 1969, that is how I competed, was with the backward style. And from that point, a little more than 2 years later, I set the high school national record. I jumped 7'1.5" in high school. And I went on to make an Olympic team the very next year as a freshman at UCLA. And the very next year after that, I set the world record. I mean, it was really a meteoric ride.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, what was it like in both 72 and 76 standing on that podium representing your country? I mean, that had to have been, I mean, what a thrill. What was that like?
Well, I went into the Munich Games. I'm the youngest member of the U.S. men's team, and I ended up being the youngest male medalist at the Olympics in Munich in track and field. And I remember standing on the podium. It was the last day of track and field. The crowd had pretty much all dispersed. It had started raining right at the end of the competition. I had matched my lifetime best winning a medal, and winning a medal was my goal because I knew from history that no American had ever failed to win a medal at the Olympic Games, and my two teammates didn't make the final. They drank a lot of beer during their visit to Munich, but they did not apparently do a lot of practicing. So I was the only American finalist, and I was leading along with a Latvian fellow, an Estonian fellow, I should say, who was representing the Soviet team. And we were locked in a battle for first place until the bar got to 7'3", which was my lifetime best. And he missed on his first attempt. I barely missed. And then he made it. The East German fella made it. And I came down to my last jump against a West German guy. And the crowd was really behind him. I remember standing back there going, if I don't make this, these people are going to come out of the stands and throw him over the bar. And I'm going to be fourth. So I made it on my third attempt. He did not make it at all. I'm standing on the podium looking to my right at the Olympic champion, Yuri Tarmac. And I said, in 4 years, I'm going to be standing there. Unfortunately, 4 years later, it was raining a lot harder than that during the Olympic final. I was in world record shape. I was first in the order, which I don't relish, but it gives you an opportunity to really strike fear into your opponents if you're clearing every height easily. And I was fine through 7-3, and then it started to really, really pour. And had I been further down in the order, third or fourth in the order, it would have been too wet for me to have even cleared that. So as disappointed as I was with the same result, both the height I jumped and the place I made, looking back on it less than a week later, I realized I could have been sixth or seventh very easily if I had been drawn later in the order. So I licked my wounds. I had a season left to go. The only thing left for me at that point, because it was devastating to not win. I was probably the biggest favorite in track and field to win, was to set the world record again and to be ranked #1 in the world, both of which I did. But I would trade 9 of my 10 world records for that gold medal in Montreal, because I know I would have set the world record that day, and the world record had never been set in the high jump in the Olympic final. So those were things I wanted to do. It was not meant to be, but losing there probably extended my career by 5 or 6 years. The games were going to be in Los Angeles in 1984, and living here, Linda and I were married. She says, "Why don't you just pretend like you're preparing to make the team in 1984? I know you're going to be 30 years old. It's out of the question, but at least you can keep your name in the mix. Your TV career is just starting."
Yeah.
And suddenly things kind of fell together, and I was able to make that team as well. And then I did become the first American not to win a medal in the Olympic final. I was fourth in Los Angeles.
Well, everybody has their ups and downs, but still a storied career. I mean, really an incredible career. Before we continue, ladies and gentlemen, if you're able to turn on your screens, I know you may be eating breakfast, know you may not be looking as presentable as you might want to, but we really love to see your faces. So if you're able to turn on your cameras, we'd really love to see you and participate. That would be really great. And Dwight, also, I hear Hayden outside on the patio right now speaking into Siri on his iPad, saying, "What team is Dwight Stones on?" So he's very interested.
May I ask you a question?
Of course.
Dwight, great to have you here. Thank you so much. Rabbis, I've mentioned the idea of faith at the beginning, and I know the answer to this, but it's such a compelling story. I was wondering if you could spend just a couple minutes talking about your experience in '72 in Munich, given what happened with the Israelis and Mark Spitz and Jewish and all that stuff that was going on in your mind as such a young person. If you could just share some insight with us.
Yeah, it starts out as being not a terribly positive story in
I know.
regards to the Jewish community, and you and I have spoken about this. Again, I was 18 years old. I was the youngest member of the team. I was driven by one thing and one thing only, proving that I belonged on an Olympic team. Everybody felt it was a fluke. I won the Olympic trials. Nobody saw me coming. Who is this guy? The world record holder was an American. He didn't make the team. A guy who was in Mexico City 4 years earlier didn't make the team. So who is this guy? And I remember the morning of the memorial. They tried to compress as many of the events into the afternoon that day if the games were going to continue. And I got up a little bit later, and my coach came to me and said, "What do you want to do today?" I said, "Well, my qualifying is in 4 days if the games continue. And I think that probably this memorial is going to be standing room only. And standing around or walking great distances as a high jumper ready to compete is not a good thing to do." So I said, "I'm really inclined to train." He said, "Then let's train." And I had a very good session, got the news that the games would continue. And there was a little bit of me that at 18 years old even was, do I have my mind in the right place here? There's a lot of people who have been impacted by this in the world, and the Olympics are important to me, but in the scheme of things, is it really that important? But I banished that thought from my mind. I went ahead, I competed, and I felt I competed well. And then lo and behold, I started dating Linda, and we eventually got married. And many years into our marriage, just before Jason was bar mitzvah, I converted. And my perspective on it was completely different. Of course, I had traveled much more. I'd learned much more. I'd read much more. Linda had taught me a lot more. I had gone to Israel in the meantime. And I felt a little bit bad about my perspective of when I look back and in perspective on how I felt. And then I realized, Dwight, give yourself a break. You were 18 years old. You weren't terribly religious. You didn't have any particular faith. So I wrote an article for Reader's Digest before the Soul Games, pretty much explaining in a longer form what I'm explaining to you now. And unfortunately, there was a lot of negative blowback from it, focusing on my feelings when I was a kid. But I understand that there are people out there that will troll you no matter what. And I just feel that though my perspective looking back, I was focused on one thing. And I'm glad that I did what it is that I did. But even sports at the Olympic level, at the professional level, anything at the highest level has to be kept in perspective. How much impact is it really having? How important is it really in the scheme of things? And that's probably what I've learned most from that. And I've tried to take that and apply it wherever I can. Give myself a break when I deserve one, but also be philosophical enough about it to think it through and say, what is the greater good? What is really important here? And I think that's the main lesson that I learned from that experience.
Thanks, Dwight.
Dwight, that's must have been something, being there for that. And then obviously now looking in hindsight, that's a great story. Thank you. Dwight, let's talk a little bit about the Olympics. We're going to shift away from the personal and really talk about the global here. I know a lot of people are interested. The pandemic has unfortunately put the Tokyo Games on hold, which is a shame because I think we all look forward to watching the Olympics. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the Olympics? What do you think is going to happen versus what the realities might be? And then, looking way ahead to LA hosting the games back here in Southern California in a few years from now. What are your thoughts?
Well, as I've grown older in this and having done television for more than 40 years and covered every Olympics since Los Angeles, including Los Angeles, the Olympics is athletic Christmas. It really is. Those of us who follow it closely, of course, it's the biggest event every 4 years. It's the Super Bowl, but not every year. But I also am cynical enough to understand how the Olympics work. It's big business, it's big money, and I am by far a glass half full, actually full person. That's me. And even I am pessimistic about the Tokyo Games proceeding. I think the only people now who want it to continue is the local organizing committee, Tokyo's organizing committee, and to some degree the IOC. And as soon as the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, decides to pull the plug, that's it. They own it. It's theirs. So I feel sooner rather than later, don't jerk the athletes around into thinking that you're going to be able to hold this event. The athletes are way down on the ladder of getting this vaccine. They're young, they're healthy, obviously, and they just aren't going to be able to get in line until sometime in the spring, I'm thinking. Also, it probably couldn't be worse than it is right now. Look at what's happening in this country. It's not a whole lot better globally. There is a surge in Japan right now in the virus. They've lost 80% of people who reside in Tokyo, and they've lost 66% of the people in the country. They aren't backing the games now. So that is all pointing in the wrong direction. I say cancel it now, give them the rights to 2032 so they can recoup some of their investment. They'll have to upgrade some things, but they will not have wasted their money. And let's get ready for Paris in 2024. There's a Winter Games just a year away in Beijing. So we can't push it into next year. So stop screwing around with the athletes' minds and bodies and contracts and everything else, and just declare it that it was just bad timing and move along. Will I be thrilled if they decide otherwise and they can pull it off? Yeah, of course. Will I cover it? I was in negotiations with a group that covers the games for the Caribbean nations, which I worked for 4 years ago in Rio. So will I do it remotely? Will I go? I don't know. My first event's in a month. I'm being told I'm going to be flying to Arkansas and doing it on site, but I haven't gotten the absolute definitive answer to that. So from a television standpoint and the fact that I love the Olympics, I would love for it to come off. But if it comes off with limited crowds, and the results are not as good as they could be because of everybody having to prepare late. We don't even really have qualifying events right now. I just don't know how I can't imagine being an athlete right now in this position. It would be torture.
Right, and I'm thinking about it from a sports perspective overall. I mean, players are in limbo, and you're exactly right. They're not high on the vaccine list. I was curious, and you answered the question really about the monetary aspect of things. And Tokyo spent billions of dollars, or Japan has spent billions of dollars on these games. I mean, does that money just disappear? I mean, there are so many questions and so many factors. Not just is it safe for the games to go forward, but there are many of these other games. And then, as you said, I'm wondering if there's, the games, both the summer and the winter games used to be in the same year, if I recall. I mean, I
Right.
remember '88, I believe they were was '88 was the last year that they were no, in '92.
92.
92 was the last year, Albertville and Barcelona. And I'm wondering if there will now be an oversaturation of the television markets, of so many different things going on, if they try to force these games too close to Beijing next year.
Oh, it's also a nightmare for NBC Sports to cover. They have the
Right.
rights sight unseen until 2032. I mean, now we would know where all the summer games are if they just gave it to Tokyo. And of course, they have an insurance policy against these things getting canceled. They learned, in fact, they had an insurance policy in 1980 when the Moscow games were canceled. They're not stupid.
Right.
So they're not going to lose any money, but they want to make money. Let's face it, the Olympics, Summer Olympics especially, are not counter programmed. Sorry to get a little technical on the TV side, but during the summer, think about what's happening. We're in the middle of baseball season. The football season sort of just gearing up. So they had some unfortunate problems in Seoul and in Sydney with those games being very late in the year because of the weather. And so the IOC passed a law or a rule pretty much for the American rights holder. The games must be concluded in the month of August, because they were getting killed with college and NFL coming on during the Olympic Games. So they stand to make a lot of money as a network and promote a lot of their fall programming. That won't be there to do.
Yeah.
So they have a stake also, but they are not going to be losing, billions of dollars that they've.
Right.
And Japan will lose money, yes. And they were always going to lose money. Let's face it, they were going to totally overspend on this. But a lot of what they would recoup would be in ticket sales. Well, there's the problem. A lot of these events are in arenas. And you, in this situation, in this environment, do you really want to pack 20, 25,000 people in an arena? Do you want to put 75,000 people in an outdoor stadium right now next to each other at, $1,000 a ticket for a seat?
Yeah, and so that's the question in the sports world overall, really the dilemma. I mean, what has this done for professional athletes, for sports? The NBA, for example, had the bubble that they played in Orlando. Baseball, only played within division, so it would limit. And then they did this whole bubble scenario in Texas, and they even did have fans. Football, some stadiums had fans, some didn't, depending geographically. I mean, what does this do for the psyche of athletes? What does this do for programs? And what is realistic in this scenario?
Well, I will tell you, as an athlete, you love to have a crowd. Of course, you clear a bar at a high height, you want to meet, you have a big exultation of the crowd. It's wonderful. But I will tell you, when you're actually in the act of performing your skill, whether it be your assignment in a team or your individual performance, you're standing at your blocks. Let me tell you, you are not thinking about how many people are or are not in the stadium. So just from that standpoint, it's more for the fans watching than it is for the athletes competing. They're going to compete hard no matter what. They've trained for it. They've prepared for it. They're mentally psyched for it. So that really isn't the component. It's just the diminution of the event itself. The fact that the event is being overshadowed by this outside force over which we've had very little or no control for the last almost full year. That's really the problem as I see it. And to have these athletes, again, kind of getting jerked around a little bit. Track and field is finding a way to have competitions and safely. It's a sport that's pretty safe for field events. For jumping and throwing events, pretty easy to socially distance. Running events, not so much. There's a lot of bumping and stepping on toes and trying to find space to run. I mean, there's a lot of contact in track and field. Right. There's not supposed to be so much, but there's plenty. But they are managing to do it. They're limiting the events and they are doing it. But it's just so foreign to what we're used to. And that's the adaptation. It's foreign for all of us. We're all adapting. And certainly I'm the silver lining guy. I'm always looking for the silver lining in any cloud. And I'm sure there is one here. The fact that we're able to do this so readily, this is going to become more the norm than it is the exception. And lots of different things in our lives will change that for the good that are a result of this pandemic. But you have to search pretty hard to find the good stuff.
Yeah, no question about that. We just spoke a little bit about the athlete perspective. I'm also wondering about the fan perspective, and I mean, this has been very challenging. And for most of you here that know me, I'm a sports fan. I love sports. Not as much as I love Judaism in my family, but almost to the highest extent. But sports fans, fan is short for fanatic. And there are people who live and breathe sports, and they go to every game. Some go to UCLA and USC games every single week, and they tailgate. I went to the Ohio State University, and that it is a religion. In fact, on game day, Ohio Stadium is the fourth largest city population wise in the state of Ohio. So I mean, it's really an incredible thing. And during the pandemic, when there were no sports, and we saw the writing on the wall when what was his name, Rudy Gobert or whatever his name is for the Utah Jazz, came down with COVID and tested positive, and we said sports are done for the next however long. But what does this do for fans? I mean, not being able to go and cheer on your team, and as a Dodger fan, not being able to go see my team win a World Series. I mean, what's this gonna do if fans continue to not be able to go in the stands?
Well, as you know, sports is a release. It's an escape. It's cathartic. It's allows you to stop thinking about whatever it is that you have to do in life, whether it's your job or situations that are stressful with your family. It's an escape. And when you don't have that escape, and you can't go to the gym, what are your alternatives to relieving that stress? What are the alternatives to keeping that fanaticism? Where do you put it? Do you start cleaning out your garage? Do you start painting your house? I mean, that's the reason I think a lot of people are doing things in their homes, because they're so pent up with energy that they can't find an outlet for, that they go and do something to substitute it for. I haven't lifted a weight in 10 and a half months. I can just feel my strength sapping from my body. And the local high school was pretty much open up until around September. And they got really serious about locking it down. So I'm very intermittent with my running workouts, and I do very specific stuff. I'm pretty anal retentive about the way I still train. And if I can't do what I normally do, I just don't do it. And I feel bad because it is my release. Those endorphins are real. As much as I hate to train, and I truly do hate it, it still is. I know the benefits of it far outweigh how much I hate it. So I do it anyway. But my options are limited, and I'm not stupid enough to put myself in a situation in a gym, for crying out loud. I mean, they did open a couple of times, and I thought about it for a moment. I said, is there a better petri dish for me getting sick than to go to this gym? I mean, I just can't do it. So I've got to find some other way to do it, or I'm going to wither away to nothing. But it really is the release of stress and the way to put your focus somewhere else that we're missing. And I think you got to find a substitute. I know that I was on my way to an event in mid-March, and I called from John Wayne. I called my executive producer. I said, so should I get on this plane? It was the NCAA Indoor Championships. I was going to Albuquerque. And he said, as far as we know, all the teams are there, and it's happening. No crowd, but it's happening. I said, okay. So I changed planes in Phoenix. I called him again. I said, there's a lot more options for me to get home from Phoenix than there are from Albuquerque. Should I keep going? He said, yep, we're on. We're still going. As soon as the wheels hit the ground in Albuquerque and my phone turned on, it was the announcement that the NCAA had canceled.
There it is.
I spent 5 hours in the airport trying to get home that day. And I didn't do that event. I did one event last year. I did the SEC championships at the end of February, and that is it. And that's the same event I'm supposed to start doing next month. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, broadcasters are affected, no doubt, as well. I mean, they're calling games from their homes. I mean, even ESPN broadcasters, I remember back in March or whenever it was, all the Baseball Tonight people are literally calling games from the KBO, the Korean Baseball Organization. And like us, we're staying up at 3 in the morning just to watch these small teams from South Korea play. I mean, it was really something. There are a couple questions that were asked before we move on, and I know my dad had a great question. He's a big fan of yours, and so Gary Zive is wondering, what was it like to walk and march in during the Olympic ceremonies for the first time as an American?
Yeah, that was nuts. And the good news is, my event was the last 2 days of the Olympics. So I had a 2 week window to recover from that experience. And you do have to, as I mentioned, standing around and walking are the worst things a person who's going to run and jump can possibly do. You don't see a lot of swimmers at opening ceremonies because they're going to be competing in the next couple of days. It takes you a few days to get that day out of your legs. But the whole idea of you really have made it here. This dream is now being realized. Absorb it, enjoy it. And I do remember a lot about my opening ceremonies experiences, and I do relish them, and I do have nothing negative to say about them. I didn't get any dove poop on me, so that's a positive. The uniforms are a little cheesy, but you don't care because all your teammates are wearing the same thing. Doesn't matter. So you are in a very, very small fraternity slash sorority when you're standing there in your dress uniform, walking into opening ceremonies at the Olympic Games, representing your country. There's nothing better. There's nothing that I can tell you that in athletics that is better than that and knowing it. The regret I have of not winning, as much as being Olympic champion is a nice thing on my resume, is that when I was standing on the third place podium spot, they weren't playing my anthem. And in my head, my anthem was playing and I was looking at my flag, but that's not the anthem that was playing in the stadium. It really did drive me because I started high jumping watching a track meet that was the antithesis of East-West Cold War. And I was not well thought of when my idol was a Russian high jumper for years and years and years. But he's the guy that I tried to emulate. He's the guy that brought me into the sport. I was fortunate enough to meet him a couple of times before he died. And that's how I rolled at the time. He inspired me. And though it was not popular, he was my idol. And wanting to be on the US team and beat the Russians and beat the East Germans, I totally bought into that whole deal.
Absolutely. Thank you for answering that question. Dad, I hope that was good. Excellent. Excellent. We have a couple great chats or comments in the chat. David Tincuff, Jeremy Rose, they were watching the cornhole championships back in March. And I was into the rock skipping myself, the rock skipping championships. And these guys take it so seriously. I mean, so Dwight, I hope to see you broadcasting the rock skipping championships.
Now, those guys all want those to become Olympic sports. And by the way, cornhole gets better ratings than track and field. I hate to admit that. It does.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, it is a pastime of tailgating, to be sure. Dwight, let's talk sports in general right now. We have quite a big event coming up next week, the Super Bowl. We have the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Tom Brady, man, Tom Brady,
GOAT.
the GOAT. I mean, really, he's the greatest of all time. I mean, this guy, 41 years old, coming into Tampa, taking them from a garbage team, now back to the Super Bowl, and I mean, it's really incredible. He's a Michigan guy, so I struggle with that, but.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But you know what? He really is great. What are your thoughts on the big game? Who do you think's gonna pull this one out? What are some of the insides?
Well, I'm an American League kind of guy. I was an AFC guy for years. I love the Patriots. I loved any team that Peyton Manning played on. The Colts, the Broncos. I loved Elway. I hate the Raiders. I want them to be 0-16 every year. In the American League, I'm an Angels and a Red Sox fan, not so much a National League guy. So it's hard for me because Brady was with the Patriots forever and ever. I couldn't stand Belichick, but I love Brady. And he's proven that he can go anywhere in any system and make them winners. But I'm an AFC guy, and Mahomes is a great quarterback. I don't know how hurt he may still be. Is he still game time? Young guys tend to recover a lot faster than older guys do. Is he going to be able to really play, and will he be 100%? I think I'm going to have to root for Brady, to be honest with you. What a great way for him to go out, take a 7-9 team all the way to the Super Bowl and win it. Mic drop.
Well, first of all, I'm surprised they let Mahomes play in the first place. If some of you who may not know, in the AFC divisional game, Mahomes was kind of knocked out. He was very wobbly and left the game with a concussion against the Cleveland Browns. And the Chiefs still were able to pull off the game. If Steve Frank's on right now, my apologies to you that we are talking about this. But yeah, it was. And then he came back and he had a good game. Buffalo is a formidable team. They are very good, and I just don't know. I don't know how you stop Kansas City's offense. It's so dynamic. Tyreek Hill, 2 steps, he's gone. I don't know how they beat Brady.
Well,
I just don't know how they beat Brady, though.
And you step up, and I think that you got Brady as a leader, and you play, you can't play above your head. That's impossible. That's death. But you can certainly play up to your potential. And I think if there's any time and any leader that can make them do that, I was a big fan of the Jets when Namath pulled it off, said that could never be done way before your time. And they did. So, the game, this is what I tell every track and field person who's making their first Olympic team. And I tell them, I said, especially if they're runners, I said, just make the final. Make the final. The first round and the semifinal, the 2 hardest races you will ever run in your life. Once you're in the final, anything can happen. People trip, people get tripped, people misjudge, they have a bad day. Just get to the big game. Once you're at the big game, in my opinion, all bets are off. Anything can happen.
How often do favorites actually win in a lot of ways? All you got to do is make the playoffs, and then anything happens, as you said. Look, it's very strange the Dodgers won the World Series this year. That almost didn't happen.
Well, the wild card team wins the series a lot.
A lot. Exactly. And they are always on the road, mind you. There was that Baltimore Ravens team back in 2001, and then it happens. It happens all the time. And so, once you get there, I think that's really true. We have a lot of people commenting right now. So Jen Silver's a huge lead to, where is Jen? I'm looking on here. There she is. A huge lead to beat Brady. I would like to remind you of the Super Bowl, 2 years ago against the Atlanta Falcons. And they were down, 27-3 at halftime and still came back and won. So that don't mean nothing. Just saying. But I appreciate your input. David Tincuff has a great question, Dwight. From a production standpoint, how many cameras will they use to broadcast that game?
Oh my gosh, I couldn't tell you. Way more than they probably need, to be honest with you. The NFL contract is gigantic. There's just no such thing as too much money to throw at it because of the franchise that it is. I would think in excess of 30 cameras easily. And then you've got that amount of tape machines, that amount of personnel that run the tape machines. It is an insane undertaking. Like the Olympics, to be honest with you, except in the Olympics are much more spread out. This is all in one place. I know we cover track and field at the Olympic level. I think it's 26 unilateral cameras, which are supplemental to the cameras that the world uses. So it is almost over covered. They want every angle possible. And frankly, it needs to be. Look at all of the quote unquote bad calls that oftentimes are game changers. And you want to be able to try and see that from what angle you can possibly, that might influence the referee and the line judge, because now they have to take a look at a lot of these plays to see if they blew it. They are human. It is somewhat subjective. Just like I'm not a fan of balls and strikes being called by a computer, but sometimes it makes and breaks the game. I know that's always been part of the game, and it's almost part of what I like about the game, but it's also what I loved about track and field. First person across the line is the winner. The person who jumps furthest or throws furthest wins. The person who jumps highest wins. There's no equivocation on it. So everything else almost is subjective on some level.
You know, in the Jewish field, I'm wondering whoever finishes the sermon first on the high holidays. Whoever's the quickest sermon's usually the winner, right? No, no, no. Yes, no. Okay.
No, nobody's ever complained that a rabbi preached too long, too short rather.
Too short.
Rabbi,
Oh, I thought you were saying who finishes their writing their high holiday sermon first.
That was what I meant. That was what I meant. Whoever finishes first.
What ends up happening that year then you've got to rewrite the whole thing because something happens in the world.
And you just pray that something doesn't happen 2 days before. That's exactly right. If anybody else has some questions or whatnot, Dwight, I feel like I just had a brilliant question to ask you, and now I forgot exactly what it was because it wasn't on my list of questions. But if anybody else has a question they'd like to ask, now is your time. Oh, Jay Kramer, this is a great one. What advice would you give a young kid who has a dream of being an Olympic high jumper?
Well, I would probably say what my great high school coach said when I came to him, and stars in my eyes, obviously, and gave him my whole resume. And this was 1968, December 1968. And I told him I wanted to be on the next Olympic team. After watching the 68 games, I learned a couple things. Number one, the next games were in Munich. Number two, Munich was not at altitude. And altitude was good for sprinters and jumpers. So I went, okay, so it's not going to be as good as Mexico City. And unbeknownst to me at the time, my high school coach was a 1952 Olympian in the 800 meters. I did not know that till my senior year. And I went to, I said, I want to be on the next Olympic team. My personal best was 5 feet 6 inches at the time. And rather than mock me or laugh or chuckle or whoa, son, or any of that stuff, he went, okay, let's get to work.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that because he took me seriously. And it was a struggle at first. I had to switch techniques from the straddle to the flop. He didn't really want to do that, but he was open-minded enough to take a look. I performed when I needed to in order to prove to him that that was the way that I probably should go. We learned the technique together. He kept it really simple. He gave me signposts in my training that I should shoot for, that I could focus on. And as a coach, that's what I try to do. I try not to overcoach. I try not to give the athlete too many things to think about because there's lots of things you can think about.
Yeah.
I know the event inside and out from a lot of angles, and I could lecture on it for hours, but that's not a good way to coach. You try to keep it as simple as possible and focus on things that they can do. And when they reach a plateau, you switch gears so that they don't get stuck, because expectations are the absolute killer of any career at any level in anything. You set certain expectations and they are not reached, and you keep banging on that door with your head and you can't get through. If you keep doing that, you really, really can discourage a person. So you find a way to sidestep, go someplace else, and then revisit it later. And oftentimes there's a breakthrough. So, and that's after 25 plus years of coaching that I've learned these things. I didn't know them right away when I stopped competing myself. In fact, I was a lousy coach when I first started coaching after I just stopped competing. That's kind of normal. But when you get the distance and the perspective of not doing it for yourself anymore, realize that there's more than one way to skin a cat, that the way you did it may have been very successful, but it's not the only way to do it. That's when you start to become a good coach. And I consider myself a pretty good coach, and I love coaching the high school level because it really is the make or break. That's where kids learn how to train. They learn the fundamentals of the technique, and ours is a very technical event, as is most every event in track and field. And if they learn the wrong skills, I don't care how good they are. Once they're embedded, they're very, very difficult to break. So I feel like I'm sort of in the grassroots part of the sport, and I do love it. I love seeing kids improve, and I love seeing the love of what they're doing in their eyes.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great question, Jay. We appreciate that. We have only a few minutes left. I do remember my question, and it's one I've been wondering. I'd love to hear your comment. So, what we're seeing right now, Tom Brady, for example, 41 years old, Aaron Rodgers, really still at the top of his game. He's 38. I mean, he's definitely Drew Brees. Also, Peyton Manning was an incredible quarterback into his 40-year-old year. You look at LeBron James right now, who's 36 years old and clearly still playing at peak levels. And in baseball, for example, just physics, anatomy in general says the older you get, the slower your arm gets. The less velocity you throw, and we're not seeing that as much anymore. What do you attribute this to? There was this age bracket, this prime age bracket, which still may exist, but there are these athletes that are defying this. Other than steroids, which I don't think is it. What do you think is causing this this phenomenon?
Well, I can use myself as an example. As you get older in a sport, you learn things you don't have to do that were really kind of breaking your body down because you were young and exuberant and you could recover from them. I made a lot of mistakes in training when I was younger. Also, I competed a lot when I was younger because I was a professional amateur track and field athlete. There was no such thing. We weren't supposed to be making any money. And I made a living from it because I knew that the athletes I was competing against, the Russians and the East Germans and most of from the Soviet bloc, that was their job. And unless I trained like them and had the same mindset, I was going to have a tough time beating them. So, I jumped a lot for not a whole lot of money. So I trained so I could. So when you're competing 50 to 55 times per year, first of all, you can't jump much in practice. And number two, you've got to do a lot of over distance kind of stuff on the track and more stuff in the weight room and other drills that will allow you that longevity. And then you've got to pick your breaks where you're going to suck. You're just not going to compete well because you can't compete well all the time. And you have to figure out what's important and you peak properly. Now, as you get older, you realize, okay, I don't need to do that. And I don't need to do that. And I don't need to do that, all of which is breaking me down. If you're a Brady or a Breeze or an Elway or a Manning, you also have some juice with the front office and go, listen, you better get me a front line that doesn't so I don't get knocked down. The more I get knocked down, the later in my life, the more of a toll it takes. So you don't get to see Brady get sacked very much because not only spend a lot of money on him, they need to spend a lot of money on his offensive line.
Right. He's not Tom Brady. There were only a few limited teams he was actually going to sign with because it's highly unlikely you were going to see him with, say, the Houston Texans right now, who don't have a very strong offensive line, or the Minnesota Vikings at the moment. So. Yeah, that's a great point. But what about a guy like LeBron though? In a way, LeBron definitely said, "I'm going to sign with the Lakers," but they were garbage.
Well, again, he's got some juice to. I don't care how much money I'm going to cost you. You need to spend even more money to give me a good supporting cast. Yeah. And also, as you get older in that sport, which I think is just an incredibly grueling sport, talk about beating your body up. But let's face it, he was an NBA level star in high school. He's learned some of the shortcuts. He's learned where he doesn't have to exert himself physically as much. He has the refs wrapped around his finger, and he's got the intimidation of his opponents at a very, very high level. I mean, the best thing an athlete can ever do, and I don't care whether this is in a team setting or an individual setting, it's probably more effective in an individual setting. If you can get your opponent to think more about you than they're thinking about themselves, you got it. And I made a career of that, especially early in my career. If I'm setting world records all the time and beating you senseless, you can't come into a meet thinking you're going to win. And I could be off. I could be in a down part of my training and struggle to jump 7-1 or 2 in a meet I don't really care that much about. And I'm going to beat you because you went in already defeated because you think, I can't beat this guy. So I pulled off a lot of victories that I should have not pulled off, just on pure intimidation of my resume and my history. And that's what happens at the professional level as well.
Yeah, those were the John Wooden UCLA teams. Yeah, you weren't going into Poly Pavilion and winning.
Right.
It just was not the case. It didn't matter whether they were on or off. You weren't going to win. The 1990s Bulls, the same exact thing. Michael Jordan was not going to let you win.
Yeah, I
It's
was
just,
in Poly Pavilion my freshman year. I mean, slept out to get student tickets, and I didn't miss a game. And being a part of that whole environment, and when Walton was a sophomore and Wilkes was on the team, and an amazing team. Of course, they won the NCAA championships. It was wonderful to be a part of that. And they had some rube teams that they put on the schedule early in the season, just like everybody does. But there was no greater thrill than watching the UCLA Bruins as a student in Poly Pavilion. It was awesome.
yeah. That's just great. I want to see if there's any other. Oh, here's one good question to end. I like this one. Who might be the most impactful athlete in modern history? Somebody who not only accomplished athletic records, but also impacted humanity favorably.
Okay, well, one of my huge idols and one of the people I read about when I was a kid was Bob Matthias. Bob Matthias is a decathlete who made the 1948 Olympic team as a 17-year-old, had not pole vaulted until 3 months before those Olympic Games, and won the decathlon by, I don't know, 500 or 600 points. Came back 4 years later and won by over 1,000 points, and then retired and became a member of Congress. And just a wonderful man, hugely influential on the Olympic movement from the congressional side. And I know that goes back a bit, but I don't like funerals because I really get emotional at them. I drove to Tulare to be at Bob Matthias's funeral. That's how much influence he had. I got to be very good friends with him. We did a number of charity events together. We were on a signing of some kind of a poster thing, and he and I are on the poster together. So we were in the signing together, signing our arms away for 8 hours a day that particular weekend. And just a wonderful human being. But that probably goes back too far. But those are the roots of my being influenced. Jesse Owens, huge influence on me. Randy Matson, all of these track and field guys that I watched in awe when I was barely double digits. Those are the people that influenced me. I find, however, because of 24-hour media, we know way too much about our sports heroes and our other heroes or anti-heroes. And it seems as though the media, of which I am a part, I'm sometimes, unfortunately, we seem to want to build our heroes up only so that we could find how they have feet of clay. And I'm here to tell you, we all have feet of clay. We do one thing or some skill set really well. We're ordinary people that have an extraordinary ability that is somehow worshiped by certain segments of the population. And to expect us to be at that level in everything that we do is completely unrealistic. We're still human beings. We have flaws. We do have feet of clay. And I wish the media would not focus on that, but it's somehow in order to make people think, yeah, just because he's a great athlete doesn't mean he doesn't have problems. Look, he's got this problem with drugs, or this is his fourth wife, or whatever it is, to try and minimize the impact that they had or are having. Keep them in their lane, praise them for what they do well, and otherwise, if they're just being human beings, leaving them hell alone.
Well, those are some good words. That's good advice. All have feet of clay. I love it. Anyways, Dwight, thank you. This was outstanding and a real pleasure for me. I know you're usually the one interviewing people. Me? This was a real treat. So thanks for talking sports with me this morning.